Representative Vang's bill is the first on the agenda, House File 2200. Representative Vang, welcome to the Climate and Energy Committee. I will move that House File 2200 be laid over for possible inclusion. And I understand you have an author's amendment. Would you like to describe your author's amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies for being late. I was experiencing some technical difficulties.
No problem.
My amendment, it's a DE. What it does is it just expands the bill to include other local units of government, such as counties and school districts. And that is the gist of my amendment.
Okay, the amendment is coded A22. Any discussion to the A22 to get the bill in the shape the author would like? All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The A22 is adopted. Representative Vang, please tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House File 2200 would create a local government climate action grant program. The goal of this program is to increase the number of local governments in Minnesota who are planning to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and to build resilience as climate impact grows. The program will be administered by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and would award grants up to $50,000 to local governments in Minnesota who wish to create a climate action plan with a match requirement. A preference will be given to local governments that engage a broad array of residents, organizations, and institutions. Beyond this, this bill will give local governments flexibility in their planning, how they will plan, what they focus on, and their recommended action steps that would be up to each local government to decide. The program will build in relationship with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Environmental Assistance Grant Program, which in recent years has provided support for a range of local government planning and sustainability programs. More context of this bill, the local government climate action planning is a growing practice in Minnesota. Since 2013, 13 cities in one county in Minnesota have created standalone climate action plans. These cities are urban, suburban, and in greater Minnesota. They are as large as Hennepin County and as small as Grand Marais. This type of planning is in demand because local residents are advocating for it, and local elected officials are often the ones responsible for preparing and adapting to climate impacts. This year, 16 Minnesota cities declare climate emergencies. These resolutions are a way to acknowledge the reality we're all facing and to get our local governments moving forward with practical and popular solutions. These grants will be one important way the state can support local governments that are choosing to plan and prepare. And I also want to thank the League of Minnesota Cities for their support. The written testimony is provided in this committee. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will yield my time for my testifiers who can tell you more about their local need for these grants.
Thank you so much, Representative Vang. Looks like we have 6 individuals sign up to testify, and we'll begin with our 4 city council members from across the state. And first, we will start with Council Member Larry Kraft from St. Louis Park. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great to be here. Thank you, committee members. My name is Larry Kraft. I am a city council member at large from St. Louis Park. I also led the convening of the Minnesota Cities Climate Caucus, which is a voluntary and nonpartisan coalition of primarily city elected officials from cities all around the state. And it was created to share best practices and also to influence state policy to help us meet our clean energy and climate goals. So I have 3 points to make in favor of this. 1, local governments can be very effective at this. Having a plan is extremely helpful, and cities need support. So first, local governments can be very effective at planning for and making progress on climate clean energy action. In St. Louis Park, we touch on so much, and I know this is true of many cities, including citizen education and engagement, street design, including pedestrian and biking infrastructure, tree planting, EV charging infrastructure, land use, solar energy, and partnering with utilities on energy efficiency programs. These are all things that we're involved in that our Climate Action Plan guide. And I'll mention that most of those generate significant amount of economic activity in Minnesota. Second, having a plan, a climate action plan, has been incredibly helpful in St. Louis Park. It's provided us a roadmap and a way of measuring progress. It helps us answer implementation questions like, how do we start? How are we doing? What do we do next? And what are the most impactful things we can do? Third, cities need support. As Representative Vang mentioned, about 6 weeks ago, coming out of the Minnesota Cities Climate Caucus, cities from across the state came together to declare a climate emergency at the same time. And I was about to read my testimony. I was going to say, to date, 19 cities in one county have participated in this. But I have to modify that because last night, West St. Paul also passed a climate emergency resolution. So to date, 20 cities and one county have participated in this campaign or previously declared a climate emergency, and there are more coming. These localities are from all around the state, and many don't yet have a climate action plan. One of the biggest things I've heard, especially from small to mid-sized cities, is that they need funding and technical assistance to get started. And this kind of funding that we're talking about here can be the path to getting started into that assistance. And I want to close with a story that I think a bit about Grand Marais and their challenges in getting to climate action. So a 12-year-old student at the time, Olya Wright, and others from her Nordic Nature group went before the Grand Marais City Council several years ago and convinced them to go down the path of creating a climate action plan. The challenge that Grand Marais had was they didn't have the staff to do it. So how were they going to do this? There was some help they were able to get from some nonprofits, and then Olya went before some potential funders and was able to generate funding in the order of around $20,000 to hire some resources to help them complete their plan and get started on implementation. That was amazing, but not every city has an Olya, although I wish they did. To scale that, this kind of thing would be so beneficial. So thank you again. And to summarize, local governments are very effective at this, at climate and clean energy action. Having a plan is extremely helpful, and cities need your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Kraft. Next, we will hear from Councilmember Shelley Dahlquist with the Moorhead City Council. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you. I am Shelley Dahlquist. I'm on City Council in Moorhead. I'm in Ward 1. We have 4 wards. And fellow council member Steve Lindas has been putting this stuff together, and he is out of town. So he said, would you? And I said, I will do it, but it's not going to be as good as Steve's. So we just passed that climate emergency resolution in January. And we didn't get to put a lot of hoopla into it. It was on consent because we had other things going on. But in town here, we have 2 colleges, and then of course across the river in Fargo, we have NDSU, Go Bison, and also have a community college or a tech school. So we have a lot of young people, a lot of students in town, and they took the initiative. Dr. Ken Foster at Concordia College put together, he applied for a Bush grant and put together a resiliency team of different people in the community. And so this is a couple of years ago, and he got things going. So of course it's contagious, and we want to have it here in Moorhead to take over what he started. And we are still in contact with, we have a group of Concordia students that are helping us decide how to put this committee together, who should be on it, and how we decide that. We're all really excited, but we need some help. And so if we could get some assistance on that, that would be great, because we are just starting. we'll be putting together the committee and then the climate action plan. We are on the Red River. It divides Moorhead from Fargo, North Dakota. And the change in I've lived here all my life, and the change in the flooding is astronomical. We have a large diversion program going, and a lot of it's on the North Dakota side. Minnesota's a little bit better off where we are on Moorhead. But anyway, it's billions of dollars that's been going into this too. So we're not flooded out, and a lot of homes were bought out along the river. So that's one thing. And another thing, just personally, I remember growing up, we had an apple tree in the backyard, and then the smaller decorative apple in the front. And we had dandelions, we had clover, so we had bees. You in the springtime, the trees would just be buzzing, and you'd have to be careful. You couldn't go out barefoot, you know. But I don't see that anymore. And I'll be 59 in October. And in my lifetime, I have seen that change. So we need to do this. And it would be nice to get some help with this bill so that we can put that together. I'd like to really focus on getting our kids involved with this, because as all my kids are grown up, of course, but they would come home and share things that we have changed our lifestyles, not using the plastic. They'd come home with reusable bags, and I believe the kids would be very helpful, and then they can continue on. So that's one thing I would like to do, is target some kind of education for the younger people to continue trying to fight this climate emergency the best that they can and to deal with it. We're going to be okay, but our future generations are the ones that are going to have to be dealing with this. And it's going to affect everyone. No one's going to be immune. So thank you for letting me give a little history of the Moorhead and what's going on here.
Thank you, Councilmember Dahlquist, for being with us. Next, we will hear from Councilmember Evan Brown with Red Wing. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Minnesota House Climate, Energy, and Energy, Finance, and Policy Committee. That's a bit of a mouthful. Thank you very much. I'm Evan Brown. I am a council member from the city of Red Wing and city council vice president. I have a long history in the city of Red Wing working on issues of sustainability and moving our city to help address the issues of climate change. Before I was on council, I did serve on our sustainability commission, so I have a pretty long time to kind of help our city in guiding these. Red Wing is meeting. Well, first I want to say I am so supportive of HF2200. I really, knowing how a small city manages and deals with planning for climate change issues is it's a lot on us because we are a small city. However, Red Wing is meeting our commitment to address climate change. We recently passed the resolution with other Minnesota cities declaring a climate emergency. And as I said at that vote, these effects are real and they're global, but they're also local. These effects are these are not effects that are happening somewhere else to someone else. They're happening to us right now today. That is an emergency. And that's how I take it. And I think we all have to kind of focus in on that. Red Wing has continued to commit to addressing climate change. In 2007, we signed with the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. And in 2008, we created our Sustainability Commission. A major tenet of our 2040 comprehensive plan has been sustainability and a deep analysis of our greenhouse gas emissions and how to reduce them. And as part of that, we have in our comprehensive plan a commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2040. We've developed a climate action work plan. It's a little different model than a full-scale climate action plan, and this is the area I want to most speak and why I believe this this idea for a grant program is so important. Our model is a 5-year work plan committed to actionable items to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. This model is focused on real on actions we can take right now. And I think most importantly, it's more cost effective for our city of size to undertake. Red Wing is about 16,000 residents, certainly on here in other cities that are certainly much smaller than us. Grand Marais comes to mind, that need these resources. So I can see how this grant program can really help cities start the process to create these plans. You know, a full-scale climate action plan with a 20 years horizon, those plans are pretty expensive, and they are really can be very much out of reach. As Councilmember Kraft said, you know, I mean, just dealing with the staff time can be hugely overwhelming. So our plan shortens the time frame and analysis to that shorter period, but it is also one that will need to be updated and repeated more frequently because of that shortened time frame. So I remain very hopeful of that model. And again, this program can help us continue that process. And the City of Red Wing has also been considering resiliency planning, and we've been looking for grant opportunities to do that planning. We're also considering implementing programs in our climate action work plan to assist residents and businesses more directly to help us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And this grant program could help significantly in that area as well. HF2200 helps cities address the issues of climate change by letting them develop their own plans. And I believe that the state should be really helping cities with resources to address climate change. We are on the front lines of dealing with climate change, but we can't do this alone. We need the state there. We need the federal government there. We really need everybody to pitch in for this. So again, I just want to say how much I support this bill, and I look forward to hopefully seeing it implemented and you pushing it to the next step. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony this morning. And our final council member is Councilmember Rick Blake from Grand Rapids City Council. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Rick Blake. I'm a city councilor in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and I'm glad to be here to testify in favor of this bill. I would like to say that Grand Rapids declared a climate emergency thanks to the efforts of Michelle Toven, who couldn't be here, so I agreed to step in, and I'm really glad that I can be here. So like I said, on January 24th, we declared a climate emergency. We appointed a committee, a climate emergency committee, that their first meeting will be this Friday, actually. So I'd like to piggyback a little bit on what Larry Kraft said earlier about how effective cities can be in addressing this problem. One of the examples that Grand Rapids has is a 2 megawatt solar garden that was the first community solar with a city and a utility and a public utility commission cooperating. And that whole thing was driven too by another example of a group that can have an impact, and that's a local green energy team. Without their encouragement, that never would have happened. But one of the things that did happen while we were doing that was that we committed to our customers that we would not do a project that would result in having to subsidize that solar garden. So initially it sounded like that was really going to be a slam dunk, but as we went on, it was difficult. So any source of funding that we could have had would have helped that. But eventually what made the project go was we installed battery storage so that we could reduce the peak energy each month. And that ended up making the project positive cash flow, so it wasn't an issue. Another example of something that we're doing in Grand Rapids at city level is we have the first rural autonomous vehicle project that's going to kick off this summer. There will be somebody in there watching the vehicle, but as it goes through routes in Grand Rapids, it'll reduce the need for people to own cars, for example. So that's another thing that's going to happen in Grand Rapids. That May Mobility is going to do that. We've also done some LED lighting, and I'm sure other cities have done that. Near Grand Rapids is an experimental forest where they actually have the forest enclosed and have created a future environment to see how the forest survives. Things like that are important too. Two examples last summer of the effect of the climate emergency. I went to a meeting, I think it started at 7 o'clock, and when I left that meeting at 7:45 in Grand Rapids, 5,000 people had lost power just in that 45-minute period. And the strange thing was it didn't really affect a lot of other communities in Minnesota, but it did affect Grand Rapids. And I think, although you can't point to one incident, certainly the pattern of that occurring over and over is evidence of the kinds of things that we're going to have to do to harden our infrastructure. It took a long time to get power back to those customers. Another example that affected all of us in Minnesota was the drought last summer, and that was severe. So hardening our infrastructure and improving our ability to cope with drought, those are examples of things that we can do. But who knows what kinds of creative solutions this climate emergency committee might come up with, and how important that seed money can be to come up with creative solutions for dealing with the climate emergency and its effect on all our communities. So I wholeheartedly support this bill, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Next, we will hear from Dr. Kate Knuth. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Kate Knuth, and here to testify in support of House File 2200. And thank you, Representative Vang, for bringing this bill forward. I recently, as a consultant with the 100% campaign, researched and published an overview of city climate action planning, and the one county, Hennepin County, that has completed climate action planning process, and that's included in your packets, members. So if you want to look more closely at seeing what cities are doing, but I wanted to share some overall observations from that, including the fact that there are still many cities and counties and other local governments that need help and support to do the climate action planning necessary, as our need to ramp up our emissions reductions continues, as well as the need to plan for and prepare for the climate impacts that are already here and that will be increasing over the next years and decades. So right now, Minnesota, there are 13 cities and one county that have completed local climate action planning processes and resulted in a report. There's a range of different kinds of approaches cities have taken to their planning. Cities like Red Wing, as was noted, and very recently Duluth, have taken a shorter term focus with climate action work plans to really focus on what can we do now to make emissions reductions and lay the foundation for more climate protection and preparedness going forward. Cities like Albert Lea have taken a really more expansive approach with both a focus on emissions reductions and on adaptation and resilience. The city of Minneapolis had one of the first climate action plans in 2013. They will be going through another climate action planning process this year in 2022, and really centering equity and racial equity in the work, because the impacts of climate change affect people in our community in different ways. It's not everyone in crisis faces increased risk from climate change, but not everyone faces that risk equally. And Overall in Minnesota, about a third of people live in a city or county that has done a climate action plan, which we found in our report. So there's still a significant part of our state that has not yet done a standalone climate action planning. Now, many cities are doing different pieces of climate work. We found climate action work happens in comprehensive plans. It happens with the Excel partners and energy work. It happens potentially with a broader sustainability plan. It happens with zoning and land use decision making. So there are many ways that cities and local governments show up to do climate work. And even if they're not doing climate work, they're having climate impacts in the way they design transportation infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, density decisions, things like that all have climate impacts. But we are at a point where cities across the state are declaring climate emergencies, where the evidence is overwhelming from the world scientists. I know your committee heard from an IPCC lead author just in this last week or so and talked about the need for really digging down at the local level to make sure individuals and families and communities are doing the work necessary to make the changes to lessen impact and doing the work necessary to prepare for what is coming. And that is exactly what happens with a local government climate action planning process. It really combines what we need to do to strengthen our ability to take on climate and connects individuals and communities into that work really effectively. Sometimes state or federal policymaking can feel a little far away. It's really essential for what we need to do on climate change, but to get all Minnesotans involved in this work, it will happen through that connection with and that convening with local governments. And we see the demand and the desire for this kind of leadership. And I think the state stepping up to support people all over Minnesota digging in together and building the kind of communities we know we deserve is really exciting. And that's why I support House File 2200. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Knuth. And our final presenter, speaker on the bill, and then we'll move to questions, is Ms. Kathleen Doran Norton. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name's Kathleen Doran Norton. I live near Northfield in Bridgewater Township, where I served 4 terms as a supervisor on our township board. We didn't need to declare a climate emergency. We experienced 3 years of climate emergencies, consecutive floods year after year after year, each 8 to 9 inches of rain in 24 hours, each costing between 1/3 and 1/2 of our township levy and damages, washing all the gravel off our roads, throwing a 12-foot culvert vertically through a paved road, shortening the life of other culverts and bridges by half. I've stood in a road ditch looking up at our truck, resting on 6 inches of gravel with nothing but air underneath. Following those floods and a year of packed and angry town meetings, we engaged in some very simple, focused climate adaptation planning. We did a terrain analysis of 2 flood-prone watersheds, and we implemented 3 projects to store and infiltrate stormwater, protecting our residents and those downstream in Northfield. Funded from the DNR Office of Flood Mitigation, our county's SWCD, subordinate service district fees, and our own township funds. This past fall, my county, Rice County, passed an updated comprehensive plan, which included for the first time a sustainability chapter. This only happened because of the urging of involved citizens and the leadership of Commissioner Malika. And this winter, the County Commission created a sustainability committee looking for ways to create a full-fledged plan and implement it. So I am so glad this amended bill includes counties. Consider county responsibilities: solid and hazardous waste management, disaster planning, hazard mitigation, land use controls, transportation, public health, shoreland and floodplain protection. All of these are critical climate adaptation and mitigation efforts. But out of 87 counties, as you've heard, only one has developed a climate action plan. I'd like my county to be the second. So I support HF 2200, providing planning resources to our local governments, and encourage you to support extending these happy that you're extending these planning services to counties. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I just want to thank Representative Vang for bringing this bill forward and for the really inspiring leadership of all of our testifiers at the local level. We heard last week from insurers about the spiking of climate damages, and Ms. Doran Norton, I think your vivid description of the experiences that you've seen in your township are a clear example of how this is impacting us locally. And we also heard about the importance of planning based around current data and future data, and not what we've seen in the past. And so that seems to be really telling for the work that we're doing at the local level. So we have lots of hands. We have about half an hour, so I think we'll be able to get through everyone. We'll begin with Representative Acom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And I really appreciated all of the presentations today, or all of the testimony. As a former city council member myself, I love to hear about the good work that's happening at the local level. And to see that this is happening at the local level all across our state is really important, from St. Louis Park to Moorhead to Red Wing and Grand Rapids, all really important and well beyond. And that number is continuing to grow every day. I was happy to hear from Mr. Kraft that another community was declaring a climate emergency even just last night. So I think that's an important trend and important information. And so thank you all for sharing it with me. I mean, and it's going to take all of us kind of working together in order to solve the climate crisis, and at all levels of government, city, county, and state. And so I appreciate all of that. One of the questions I have is, because we know that our window of needing to act is closing, and so we need to be acting quickly. And so I'm glad that all levels can act at the same time. My question is about how long, an estimate of how long it might take for communities to develop an action plan. So how much planning time goes into that? I don't know if that's a question for the author or Ms. Knuth. I know you've done a lot of research on what cities have done to date, but with this kind of new approach being brought forward with this bill to provide resources and expertise to cities, do we have an estimate about how long that might take to develop the plan?
Maybe we'll go to Dr. Knuth.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Acom. I think there's a range of months to maybe up to a year, depending on how much community engagement, how much staff time is available to work on it, how much consultant time. I think having resources could help speed that up, to help just, we all know if we have a grant or support to help us focus us, it can speed things up. And I think one of the things that has been really exciting to see in looking at these climate action plans overall is the newer ones tend to be more ambitious, and to really understand that action sooner and bigger has more of a difference than commitment to long-term big action, which you may not actually achieve. So the examples of Red Wing and Duluth with the climate action work plans, which are very focused on what do we do now and over the next 5 years. And I think that's a really exciting trend in this work that cities are doing. I also think there's a really important moment around planning that we're in right now as a state and as a country. And I say that because there's significant federal money coming in on infrastructure, and on some of that is related to climate resilience and to clean energy, and cities being able to plan for and figure out how to use that money effectively, I think will both help our communities prepare and help us as a state take advantage of that significant federal funding. And Duluth is a great example of a city that has in their climate action work plan a list of shovel-ready projects for if and when state, which, the significant budget surplus or federal money becomes available, they as a city will have done the thinking and the planning to be prepared for receiving that money. So again, it can take a little time to do this planning, but then it can ramp up and accelerate what cities are able to do and focus that work on what is most effective to be doing.
Thank you, Dr. Knuth.
Thank you,
Any
Dr.
brief
Chair.
follow-up, Representative Bacon?
No, I'm
Okay.
good. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, we have 8 hands, so let's try to keep questions and answers brief so we can get through them. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Vang, for this excellent bill. Just reminded me, a number of years ago, Senator Dibble and I did a bill that was requiring the Met Council to include greenhouse gas emissions reductions in comprehensive planning process, and that made it through a few committees, and then we ran into a lot of opposition from cities and the Met Council, and it's great to see that that has shifted quite dramatically, and it's so wonderful to see this bill. And I really appreciated, Dr. Knuth, that you talked about best practices in terms of integrating plans, the planning process into, climate resilience and other matters. And you had mentioned Red Wing as one of the best practices. And so I wanted to see if Councilmember Brown could elaborate a little bit more on how you integrate your comprehensive planning process with climate action. Red Wing, Richfield, and Rochester were mentioned specifically in Dr. Knuth's report.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Representative Hornstein. I think we just completed our 2040 comprehensive planning process in 2018. As a major, leg of that was issues of sustainability. That leg really got developed as a standalone focus on sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions. And so we work directly in our comprehensive planning with Great Plains Institute and to help develop some of the goals that were articulated through our community engagement process. So I think one of the reasons we went to a work plan model was that the large broad goals had been incorporated already into our comprehensive planning process. And as a consequence of that, kind of redoing that work didn't seem necessary. And as Ms. Knuth said, we decided that what we needed to do was figure out actions that we could take quickly to begin real reductions in our emissions and to analyze where our emissions directly were and what we could do quickly. So that I hope that helps address the question. A lot of it has been kind of a relationship of relying on that comprehensive plan as the backdrop. And then our belief is that what we will do is these 5 years plans every 5 years and just continue. We'll treat it more like our internal city strategic planning process, where we have our comprehensive plan, then we do our strategic plan. Out of the strategic plan, we do our 5 year planning. Really, that what are we going to do? And I think we're treating it exactly in that process. So
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
thank you.
Representative Hornstein, you're
No,
good.
thank you. I appreciate that answer, and it's great to see that we have these 3 examples in Dr. Knuth's report of Red Wing, Richfield, and Rochester. So hopefully we can get more and more cities integrating their comprehensive plan with climate. So very helpful and encouraging. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Swazinski.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Is Representative Vang available for a question?
She
Is
is
this her bill?
the bill author and she's here.
Okay, sounds good. Representative Vang, so it's my understanding that the $5 million comes from the general fund for this bill,
Mr. Chair, that's
Representative
correct.
and that'd be a
Representative
one-time grant.
Yes.
Representative Vang.
Okay, thank you.
Representative
Thank you.
Swazinski.
And then is there someone from the it's my understanding League of Minnesota Cities is in support of this bill.
Representative Vang.
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Is there someone from the League of
Representative
Minnesota
Susan.
Cities that could answer a question? I'm looking at my list here.
They're not here, I don't believe, Representative.
Oh, they
Susan.
didn't come. Okay. Maybe someone from the cities that testified. I think we heard from a few different cities. It's my understanding that the League of Minnesota Cities, or the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, is asking for an increase in LGA, which would be the local government aid, and also the counties are also asking for an increase of county program aid. What is to stop you from just, one of the things we hear about from local units of government is often there's local mandates. So if we send money to you, we also mandate how you spend it. You know, if the legislature doesn't approve this bill, but does approve higher LGA or county program aid, are you guys committed to just doing this program on your own with the first 50 grand that would come into your coffers? You can each answer that.
I think we'll have time for at least one. Councilmember Kraft.
Yeah, I can't comment on the league policies on this. What I can say is that there are many needs that cities have, especially coming out of COVID, and a targeted grant program like this would be for those cities that that are at the stage where they can use it, and there's more and more. I think it would be very effective. And also, as more and more cities do it, there's more and more opportunities to share information. So I support HF2200 as is.
Representative Swazinski.
Sounds good. So would you say in general, the city councils and the county commissioners would not make a commitment just with general funding if they were given just straight up cash, but if they were forced to, they would apply for the grant if it's available, but if they were just plain given more cash, they wouldn't prioritize this spending on their own.
Councilmember Kraft. Yes.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Swazinski, I did not say that. I'm not making a claim of what counties and cities would do. What I am saying is that, and what you've seen is cities have found ways to do this. It's just hard to do, right? And it's just, for some cities, very hard to find the resources and times and approach to do it. So, you know, I'm not going to come, I'm saying this is a mechanism that can make it easier, and you're hearing from multiple cities here that this would help substantially right now.
Representative Swazinski.
Is the folks from Grand Rapids or any of the other cities like to comment on that?
See if, let's see, Councilmember Blake.
Yeah, this is Councilmember Blake. I know what you're talking about with the LGA, but that revision is based on a formula that includes cities' aids for services and all kinds of needs besides a climate emergency. But I'm not going to say either that Grand Rapids would not prioritize a project if this bill didn't pass. But I think I think it would just help a lot. For example, that solar garden would already be producing electricity, I think, if this had been something that was available last year. So I think those two things are separate, and that's all my comments on that. Thank you.
Representative Swazinski, and then we'll need to keep moving forward to get to everybody.
Sounds good. And then just, you know, kind of where was the 5 million arrived at, Representative Vang? Is it just kind of an out of the sky number, or do you think there's hard numbers for matching grant, that sort of thing?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 5 million is a one-time appropriation. I think with the increasing demand for more cities to do climate action planning, I think if we were to, you know, max out $50,000 per city, I think it will reach 100 cities. Of course, we could always ask for more, but you know, I think this is a good, impactful number to make a difference for the state.
Representative Igo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my first question is for you, Representative Vang. You know, we just got done talking about the 5 million, but my question is, what is your average kind of plan cost to write? And I think that's just really important, you know, for transparency to the taxpayers. It's coming from the general fund. what is your average consultant cost and how long does it take them to write these plans?
Representative Vang.
Mr. Chair, I will defer this to Dr. Knutz, who may have better understanding of the cost of making these climate action plans.
Dr. Knuth.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative for the question. I think it's a range, and it depends on how the city or county decides to use their resources. Some, like the city of Richfield, it was very much a staff-driven process. It did not have as much technical analysis, but it was helping to align the city resources. And that would be less expensive than, say, Albert Lee or the city of St. Paul, who worked with consultants who could help them analyze what groups were more vulnerable, what neighborhoods were more vulnerable to flooding, what was the scale of the building reductions that needed, emissions reductions that needed to happen. So it's a range, and it depends on how cities decide to focus their resources. I know a conversation Kathleen, Doran, Norton, and I had, just the terrain analysis in Bridgewater Township was about $50,000. Now, terrain analysis may not be part of every climate action planning process, but some of this technical work can become pricey. And I think if Councilmember Kraft is interested in commenting on this in terms of city budgets and looking at how cities have pieced together the resources to do it in reference to the previous question, I think if you look at these plans, some of it's city staff, some of it's coming probably from the general fund of a city. Some of it is cities going out and securing grants from different foundation or other funding support. But that in itself takes significant resource and capacity. So from a fairness and an equity perspective, particularly for smaller cities, having a state-run and finance grant program will enable smaller cities without some of that staff capacity to be able to secure the resources without having to go out to foundations and things at the level that these early adopting cities have done. So if your Councilmember Kraft, I think, would have some more insight into some of the costs as well.
Very briefly, Councilmember Kraft, because we still have a lot of questions to get.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, what Dr. Knuth said is absolutely spot on. I mean, I've heard of, at the low end, costs in the low tens of thousands, 10, 20,000 for small things. And then depends on how significant you get, if for a larger city can touch into the six figures. So I think this approach here of 50,000 is up to 50,000 will hit the sweet spot of the kind of things that cities are doing, especially that I believe it includes some matching grants. And Dr. Knuth is absolutely right. As I told you the story of Grand Marais, all kinds of machinations were being done to figure out how to do this. And it's a barrier for especially for smaller cities.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you both for those answers. We need to have those kind of conversations so taxpayers in Minnesota understand it. If I could just have one quick follow-up for both of you then, when you're writing these plans, do you consider statewide goals, but as well as global goals, right? Because you talked about a lot about equity and inclusivity. Do we talk about how, these plans would affect places around the globe, our country, and our state? Because I think, what we're seeing around the world right now is that our decisions are really tied to supply chain management. I just want to make sure those conversations are part of climate action plans.
Councilmember Kraft, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, well, the planning process does start generally within the overall context of what's going on in the globe and where we need to be to as a globe, and everyone needs to do their part in this. So it does take that into account as you're thinking about the global goals. Often takes into account state goals, and then your local situation. So yes.
Thank you. Representative Lippert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I've been thinking about the possible benefits of having a county climate action plan, and it seems to me that there will be opportunities for collaboration among local units of government if you have the overarching plan. Dr. Knuth, I'm wondering if Hennepin County is seeing some of these opportunities, maybe Ms. Doran Norton, if you could think of some ways that townships might be able to work together if a county plan was in place.
Dr. Knuth first, and then we'll go to Ms. Doran Norton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Lippert. Yeah, I really appreciate the question because, as you know, counties do have a little bit of a different role than cities. And, you know, Hennepin County as the state's most populous county took a different approach to their climate action planning than what we've seen cities doing. And it was very much, as you noted, focused on collaborating with other levels of government within the county. So with cities, with soil and water, well, county's soil and water conservation district, but with watershed districts. So there was a lot of this sort of community engagement of the Hennepin County Climate Action Plan was really focused on how to connect with and support other local governments, particularly cities, on making the kind of progress they want to make on climate action. And an example in Hennepin County of something the county is doing is they are coordinating a building efficiency coalition collaboration among cities within the county. And that's something that counties are able to do in a way that cities are not able to do, and counties are able to do in a way that state government is not able to do. And so I think allowing this grant program to work with other levels of local government, I think is really useful. And, you know, we're seeing innovation of local government leadership by going through the process of figuring out what to do and how a particular local government can do it. And I would leave it to, I think Ms. Doran would have a great perspective as a township representative and former township supervisor about how a county could be really important.
Ms. Doran Norton.
Thank you. Yes, I think absolutely. I think of the small cities in Rice County that are smaller than my township, but certainly much more complex in their operations because of the very things that cities do. The other thing I think about is that many times climate adaptation, flood control, and that sort of thing is cheaper in more natural areas, undeveloped areas, than it is within the developed areas of small cities. I also think of how expensive engineers are on trying to find time in a big, from a big engineering company that's focused on big projects, not small projects, and how collaboration with counties might help that sort of thing occur more easily. We probably spent, townships don't have staff, and we spent once a week for at least 2 years in planning the projects that we did. And I don't know how you value our time, but that's a lot of time to spend a couple hours every week for a couple of years doing all of that. Small cities don't have staff either. And so that kind of collaboration would be very helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Doran Norton. Representative Bo. Oh, Representative Lippert, you good?
I'm good. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner. All right, Representative Bo.
Thank you, Chair Long. I guess 2 quick questions if I have time. And first is wondering, what's the status of the proposal in the other body, and are we in any way making progress on that side?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're having conversations in the Senate, but like any bills that every member has put forward, we do expect it to move forward.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Chair, my other question would be, having been on city council before too, I know sizes of cities makes a difference. I wonder how many cities are able to do their own legwork and therefore put more money into the effort versus how many will need to simply pay a consultant, and then a lot of the money goes toward consultant fees rather than final product.
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have the data on top of my head. Perhaps Dr. Knuth might be able to help answer that question. I think that, if cities are saying they need help with this climate action planning, I think as a state that we, if we're able to provide the support that we should, it is a good long-term planning and smart investment for the state to continue to do this. And perhaps Dr. Knutz, you can help answer the question.
Dr. Knuth.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative. I think one of the strengths of House File 2200 is that it trusts local government leadership to know what the people in their city or county or township need and how to engage effectively. And, I think it's also useful to note that, talking about it, I'm not sure if it's a bad thing that money would go to consultants, because what I've seen in looking at plans across the state is that consultants can help cities ramp up more quickly and can help cities wrap their heads around what they need to do. If they don't have that kind of expertise on staff and don't have a city or a county budget that enables that kind of hiring for a permanent staff member, a consultant can really help educate city staff in a faster way and have the focus of these planning processes be more effective at the city or the county doing the kind of work that is useful and important. So I expect it would be a mix in the planning processes that have happened already. Some have been more staff-led and some have been staff-led with consultants' help. And that, that doesn't necessarily depend on the size of the city. St. Paul, for example, worked with the Great Plains Institute. Minneapolis, I think, will announce that working with a consultant on their city climate action planning process. So by ramping up this planning work, we are in a way ramping up the expertise and the capability of Minnesotans all over the state to take effective, smart climate action. And I see that as a really useful thing state government can do in terms of investing in local leadership and capacity and really trusting local government leadership to know what their communities need.
Councilmember Kraft, I see you have your hands up. So if you want to briefly add, then we have 3 more hands to get to.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Briefly, I agree that the consultants can really shorten this and be more cost effective than trying to do everything from a staff perspective. I will tell you, in my couple of years on council, I know even St. Louis Park, which is a mid-sized city that has a decent amount of staff, we use consultants for street design when we need to have something specifically difficult, our water infrastructure. We've also used them around police reform, right, and police stuff. So I appreciate I think what's behind this question of making sure we're good stewards of people's money, which I absolutely agree with, but the judicious use of consultants here can actually help us be more effective, more rapidly, and more cost effectively.
Thank you, Councilmember Kraft. Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Vang, for bringing this bill forward. Mr. Chair, maybe this question will be for Councilmember Brown or Kraft. Can you just share with me how have you used your climate action plans to guide your city's capital planning and budgeting?
Councilmember Brown first.
Thank you, Representative Lee. I think one of the big things in our climate action plan has been to develop our EV charging and EV capabilities for the city and developing more planning and zoning tools around implementing the EV infrastructure. That's been a really big focus of ours. Additionally, we've been looking at building envelopes and implementing a program for commercial buildings that mimics the state building B3 program. So those are 2 real big things that we hit early on as elements of our climate action work plan and already are being incorporated into our CIP planning, our capital planning.
Councilmember Kraft.
I think one of the key benefits of having a plan like this is that it becomes a lens, climate and sustainability lens with which we view almost everything that we do. So it is infused throughout our capital improvement plan in things like solar on our rec center that's going in that'll save us a bunch of money over time. As we purchase new vehicles, new heavy duty vehicles for plowing and other things, we look at what's the most efficient, gas efficient or electric alternatives. As we do street improvements and or add bridges in place, we're looking at those through a lens as well of how they can help get more people out walking and biking to not only reduce the amount of pollution coming from fossil fuel vehicles, but also to create community. So I think having that plan is a huge thing in that it infuses almost everything we do.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last follow-up then, just for both, and maybe it's for some of the other local representatives on here. You know, as we travel throughout the state for capital investment, bonding our tours and whatnot, we hear a lot of requests for projects that have been impacted by, you know, some of these extreme weathers that we are seeing. And so I'm just curious, you know, in your plans, do you really look at the climate's impact to your local infrastructure right now, and how will that potentially lead to you know, your municipalities, your local units of government reaching out to the state for capital investment dollars in the future?
Anybody want to respond to that? Councilmember Kraft, you want to?
Yeah, I can. I was trying to pause it. Well, I tell you, in St. Louis Park, we had a couple of years ago, flooding happened that had never happened before, and it flooded out an area that had a new playground for a school we had just reopened, and that caused kids to not be able to go outside in the playground for like 6 to 8 weeks. So that kind of infrastructure is something we're now evaluating. Do we need to put in a permanent new pumping station that could cost $500,000? I will also tell you, in our neighboring community of Edina, they're just investing about $12 million on flood mitigation on areas that are, as more rain events have happened. I don't know if they've come for that, but those kinds of things, as we look at our infrastructure, as we look at the increased amount of freeze-thaw cycles and the impacts of on our roads, I fully anticipate that there'll be increasing needs in the future.
All right, we have 2 more hands and we have 2 more bills to get to. So if we could make these questions and responses brief, that would be great. Representative Franson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Vang. I know that you're very passionate about this bill, but I would say, members, that perhaps this topic isn't our most pressing issue in the state right now. It's public safety. So about 45 minutes ago, a vehicle was involved in a drive-by shooting, shots fired.
Representative
No, this goes toward my comments, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we are the Energy Committee, not the Public Safety Committee. That
doesn't matter.
Later today.
It's all part of the plan, sir. So vehicle involved in a drive-by shooting, shots fired, was headed towards Minneapolis from 57th and Humboldt Avenue North, Brooklyn Center. So I would say, Representative Vang, that perhaps public safety is something that we should be putting the $5 million for. I know that across the state, people are wondering about roads and bridges, wastewater treatment. That's what they're wondering about for their cities, their townships, their counties. Everyday people are worried about the price of gas, and they're not exactly too thrilled about policymakers here at the legislature putting more climate change money into grifting projects. We heard about how the important need for consultants are, but I'll remind the body that we are dealing with a major fraud with the Feeding Our Future program, where hundreds of millions of dollars were entrusted in a group that was supposed to be feeding children. Instead, it went to line their own pocket. And instead, we should have been calling that feeding our fraud instead of feeding our future. And then I heard about the $50,000, it will hit the sweet spot. Well, I'm wondering then, if that hits the sweet spot, does that mean climate change has been solved in those particular communities, Representative Vang? And then if this is such a pressing issue, Representative Vang, if this climate change is such a pressing issue, Your bill was introduced March 15th, 2021. Why did it take 365 days later to get a hearing? Thank you.
I didn't realize that Feeding Our Future did climate planning, but maybe I missed something. Representative Vang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Franson, in case you may not know, I am a member of the Public Safety Committee, and I'm working closely with my colleagues on a package that has millions of dollars that deals with the public safety issues in the state. So that is a top of mind issues for me and my colleagues. And $5 million for this bill is not a lot of money. We have a $9 billion surplus that we can give back to Minnesotans in this state. And so we can definitely afford to invest in $5 million. And I know, Mr. Chair, our time is brief, but that's will be my quick response for Representative Franson. And
Thank you, Representative Vang. Representative Hollins, and then we're going to have to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Vang, for bringing this bill. I honestly am not even sure how to follow the previous line of questioning at this point. I don't want to delve super deep into that, except to say we have a budget to do climate and energy work, and that's what we're doing here. And this is a well-vetted, well-received bill. I got text messages from my own county saying how happy they were that counties have been included in this particular provision. I don't think that any group of people in Minnesota would say that this is not well received and this isn't something that they care about. They would like to absolutely have funding for this. So what I was originally going to say is thank you so much for thinking about smaller municipalities, cities, and counties in this work. Even though I currently live and represent the capital city in a major metropolitan area, I was born and raised in a small town. And knowing that everybody's needs are different and getting that support from the state can make such a huge difference when we're talking about creating climate action plans and resiliency plans. So thank you so much, Representative Vang, for bringing this really important piece of legislation here. I appreciate all the hard work you did on this, and I know that the other counties and cities in the state of Minnesota appreciate it as well. Thank you.
So we are overtime members, so I'm sorry, Representative Stevenson, we won't have time to get to you, but thank you, Representative Vang, for bringing your bill forward. And with that, I will renew my motion that House File 2200 be laid over, and the bill is laid over.